He had seen a lot through the lens of his camera. Cheaters, secrets, even threats. But nothing, not even years of spying on strangers, could prepare him for what the camera captured that night. Not a person, not a shadow. Something else. Something that shouldn't exist. Ethan first held a camera when he was 7 years old. Since then, he never let go of it. Over the years, Ethan became a professional photographer, but he didn't make his living shooting weddings or graduations. His income came from spying. His main clients were jealous husbands and wives, suspicious their partners were cheating. But Ethan's real passion was vintage photography. With the money he earned, he collected old film cameras and shot for his own pleasure. One day, Ethan got a visit from an old client, Gregory Warren. A couple of years back, Gregory had hired Ethan to follow his ex-wife, Elaine. Ethan did a brilliant job. He caught compromising photos of her, confirming Gregory's suspicions. Now Gregory explained that Elaine had run off with her lover, and he had remarried. His new wife, young and beautiful Natalie, was now the subject of his doubts. Ethan promised to help his loyal client again. That very evening, Ethan got to work. He set up near the Warrens' apartment and began his watch, but that night, nothing suspicious happened. Natalie spent the evening with Gregory. They seemed happy, lost in each other. Ethan realized the surveillance could take a while. To pass the time, he pulled out his favorite film camera. Shooting on film meant more to Ethan than any digital frame ever could. Even while on the job, he often managed to snap a few shots for his own collection. He was scanning for a good composition when suddenly, through the viewfinder, a figure appeared. A woman, but not quite a woman. Something twisted, wrong, barely human. His hands trembled with fear, but his instincts took over. Before bolting from his position, Ethan snapped a few quick photos of the entity. Ethan's first instinct was to rush into his darkroom and develop the photos. But the moment he thought of that woman, that thing, chills ran down his spine. He didn't want to go in there, not alone. Instead, he turned on a comedy on his laptop, poured himself half a bottle of whiskey, and tried to forget the nightmare. Eventually, he fell asleep in front of the screen. But alcohol and movies couldn't erase what he'd seen. That figure haunted his dreams, and it was as if his old film camera was pulling her closer. He woke to the sound of his alarm. Day 2 of surveillance had begun. Ethan felt awful. The whiskey had done its job, and the nightmare still clung to his memory. Strangely, he couldn't find his film camera anywhere. Shrugging it off, Ethan packed quickly and returned to his observation spot near the Warrens' building. Gregory wasn't home. Natalie didn't seem to be going anywhere either. It looked like another boring day, so Ethan made himself comfortable and waited. Eventually, Natalie began getting ready to go out. Ethan's instincts tingled. Something was about to happen. He was sure he'd catch her doing something questionable. And then he noticed someone sitting on a bench across from the building. A man. He looked oddly familiar. Then Ethan remembered he had seen that man a little over 2 years ago during his surveillance of Gregory's ex-wife, Elaine. Back then, Elaine seemed like a perfect wife. Ethan had watched her for months and never found any dirt. But Gregory was convinced she was cheating and insisted the surveillance continue. One day, Ethan witnessed an ambiguous moment. Elaine, smiling happily, ran into the arms of a young man waiting with flowers. Ethan managed to snap a few photos before his battery died, cutting the stakeout short. Still, he felt he'd gotten what he needed. He emailed the pictures to Gregory and promised to resume the next day. But just seconds later, Ethan received 2 text messages. The first told him to stop all surveillance immediately. The second confirmed a generous deposit into his bank account. Now that same man from 2 years ago sat on the bench again, looking tired and aged. Ethan stepped out of hiding, about to speak, but at that moment Natalie appeared, dressed up, and hurried around the corner. Ethan didn't want to lose her and quickly followed. Turns out Natalie wasn't as innocent as she seemed. She did have a lover, no doubt about it. Ethan snapped several pictures. Then his phone rang. It was Gregory asking for updates. Ethan told him he had some interesting material and promised to send it soon. He peeked into the viewfinder once more and screamed. There she was, that same monstrous woman from the night before. The shock made Ethan stumble and fall, spooking Natalie and her lover, who ran off in different directions. Ethan was terrified. He realized he no longer wanted, or was even able, to keep working on this case. Shaking, he sent Gregory the few photos he had managed to take, and called him, ready to back out completely. But Gregory didn't want to listen. He already knew more than he was letting on. A sick feeling twisted in Ethan's gut. He remembered those shots he'd taken of the terrifying woman and decided to develop the film. It was the only way to find out the truth. Was it a hallucination? A lens defect? Or had he really seen something otherworldly? His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He was terrified of seeing that creature again. But when the images finally appeared on the photo paper, what he saw made no sense. These weren't the pictures he had taken. Ethan leaned in closer, and with each frame, the horror deepened. The photos now showed a brutal beating. Elaine, Gregory's ex-wife, being violently attacked. Ethan stared, unable to breathe, and then, in the corner of the room, the woman, the entity, reappeared. But this time, he understood who she was. Guilt consumed him. Ethan couldn't sit back and do nothing anymore. Gregory wasn't answering his calls. Something told Ethan he had to act, and quickly, or something irreversible would happen. He rushed to Gregory's apartment. The door was unlocked. Ethan stepped inside and froze. Now he knew why Gregory had gone silent. He was preparing to kill Natalie. When Gregory noticed Ethan, he flew into a rage. And in that moment, Ethan realized the horrible truth. 2 years ago, Gregory had murdered his wife. Gregory didn't deny it. He told Ethan exactly what had happened after receiving those photos. Elaine had come home like nothing was wrong, carrying flowers, probably from the man Ethan had seen her embrace. Gregory lost control. He beat her. Then he killed her. He dismembered her body and dumped the pieces in a trash bin. Later, he told police that she had packed her things and run away with her lover. Now, face twisted with fury, Gregory threatened Ethan. If he kept digging, he'd be next. Then, like a rag doll, he threw Ethan out of the apartment. Ethan was in shock. He couldn't believe the cruelty he had just witnessed. He had never imagined that agreeing to a surveillance job would drag him into this nightmare. Elaine was dead because of his investigation, and now Natalie might be next. Ethan stumbled down the street, barely seeing where he was going. Fate intervened. He came face to face with a man he hadn't seen in 2 years. Jeremy, the same man from the photo. Elaine's brother. Ethan realized he had to tell him everything. Jeremy might be the only one who'd believe him. He showed Jeremy the photo on his phone, the one taken the day of Elaine's murder. Jeremy flipped through the images, barely holding back tears. Then he saw the recent shots of Natalie with her lover. Ethan had to confess. He had been spying on both of Gregory's wives. Jeremy didn't need an explanation. He understood everything. Gregory had done something horrible to his sister. Jeremy's face twisted in grief and rage. He stormed into Gregory's apartment. Gregory, shameless as ever, called Elaine a slut. Said she got what she deserved. That was the last straw. Jeremy grabbed a golf club and took justice into his own hands. Ethan, still reeling from what he'd witnessed earlier, ran after Jeremy. He didn't want another death on his conscience. But he was too late. When he entered the bathroom, the scene was already over. Jeremy stood over Gregory's body, covered in blood, panting, hollow-eyed. And in that moment, Ethan saw her. Elaine. Her spirit stood behind her brother, radiant and peaceful. She had been avenged. She thanked Jeremy in silence for freeing the world from her sadistic, murderous husband. But Jeremy now had to live with the weight of what he'd done. Natalie, unable to cope with what she had witnessed, was eventually committed to a psychiatric hospital. Jeremy was sentenced to 3 years probation. His lawyer proved he acted in a state of temporary insanity. As for Ethan, he never picked up a camera again. They say fire purifies, but for Daniel, it burned away everything, his home, his job, his past. And soon he would learn it wasn't just a fire, it was a curse, one that had waited generations to reach him. Daniel had nowhere to go. Not long ago, he had his own apartment in the heart of the city, a decent job, and plans for the future. Now, overnight, he was homeless. Everything he owned had gone up in flames. No home, no money, no documents, just ashes. A week earlier, his apartment had burned to the ground, taking his entire life with it. It was hard for Daniel to grasp the weight of it all. He lost his job too. No one wanted to deal with a dishevelled drunk who smelled like smoke. Daniel had always liked to drink, but now he believed the bottle was all he had left. The fire had been massive. Photos of the wreckage had splashed across the front pages of local newspapers. Daniel had no idea what to do next. He'd always been a loner, no family, no friends. That's just how life turned out. Drunk to the point of numbness, he passed out on a park bench in the city. And then, something that didn't feel quite real, a woman approached the bench, or something like a woman. She looked demonic, with a horrific burn scarring half her face. Her eyes locked onto Daniel with a wild, crazed glare, and then she let out a hideous, mocking laugh, twisted and inhuman. Terror seized him. The nightmare seemed endless, but eventually she vanished. Daniel finished what was left in his bottle, trying to erase the memory, and finally drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Daniel woke the next morning with a splitting hangover and a slight fever. Laughter, light, childlike, rung in his ears. A new day had begun, but Daniel knew it would bring him nothing good. He didn't want to open his eyes. The world around him felt distant, alien. He was an outcast, a stain no one wanted to see. Even the street cleaners spat in his direction. He couldn't stay on the bench anymore. He was chased off, practically with a broom. With nowhere to go, Daniel began to wander. Then, suddenly, his nightmare returned. That same woman, that same grotesque face. But within seconds, the vision melted away. Disoriented and numb, Daniel kept walking, with no destination in mind. His head throbbed, his legs felt heavy, but he forced himself to wash up in a public restroom. Even in the water's surface he saw fire. That element had haunted him since childhood. Years ago, a house fire had taken his parents and left him an orphan, and now, once again, the flames had left him with nothing. He wondered why fate seemed to favour some while cursing others. With those bitter thoughts, Daniel made his way to the bus station. He had one idea left: return to the village where he was born, where his parents and grandparents once lived. He hoped, naively, that someone there might offer help, or at least a sense of belonging. Gathering the last of his coins, he bought a bus ticket and with it, a fragile sliver of hope. 2.5 hours later, he arrived in his hometown. He hadn't been back since he was young. A rush of nostalgia hit him like a wave. But the villagers didn't welcome him. They avoided him, like he was diseased. Daniel went door to door, asking old neighbours for a place to spend the night. But, one by one, they all refused. And eventually, he understood the truth. He wasn't wanted here. No one explained why. They simply closed their doors and turned away in silence. Just as Daniel was about to give up, an elderly man named Uncle Mitch took pity on him. He was an old friend of Daniel's father. He offered him a place to sleep in the shed behind his house. As they talked, Mitch recalled vague memories, fishing trips with Daniel's dad, laughter from long ago, memories of a life Daniel would never get back. The weight of injustice returned to Daniel's heart like a familiar ache. That night, Uncle Mitch let Daniel sleep in the shed behind his house. He even brought out a bottle of vodka and suggested they drink to the reunion. Naturally, Daniel didn't refuse. As the alcohol settled in, a real conversation began. Daniel decided to ask the question that had been gnawing at him. Why were the villagers treating him like a pariah? Uncle Mitch hesitated. He mumbled something about an old, strange story, something that went back generations. But he didn't explain further, and instead he told Daniel to visit an elderly woman named Grandma Annie. She, he said, would know the full tale. Daniel was left confused and restless. He smoked a cigarette to calm his nerves and then fell asleep in the hay. He awoke in the middle of the night, not from a dream, but from heat. Opening his eyes, he panicked. The dry hay around him was on fire. Flames crept closer by the second, and then he heard it again, that horrible laugh. The disfigured woman's laughter. She wanted him dead, burned to death. Somehow Daniel managed to smother the fire before it spread, but the vision and the woman's words echoed endlessly in his mind. The next morning, Daniel made his way to see Grandma Annie. He was certain now. There was a reason the villagers feared him, and he intended to uncover it. Grandma Annie recognized him the moment he arrived. She greeted him by his full name and invited him to sit down. It made Daniel uneasy. How could she know who he was so instantly? But he hid his discomfort and stayed. Without waiting for questions, Grandma Annie began to speak, and what she told him was his story, or rather, the story of a curse. It happened long ago when her own mother was a young woman. At that time, the village had been ravaged by a cholera outbreak. Many lives were lost. People were terrified of the disease. No one knew where it came from or how to stop it. The peasants, uneducated and superstitious, blamed witches and demons. But no one believed that more than a man named Peter. Peter was a respected farmer, a good man by the village's standards. But when cholera claimed his wife's life and left him alone with a baby, he broke. He declared that he knew who had brought the plague, a woman named Catherine, long rumoured to be a witch. In his grief and rage, Peter demanded justice. He called for her execution. The villagers agreed, eager to place blame on anything they could see or touch. They tied Catherine to a dry tree, surrounded her with kindling branches and tar, and Peter himself lit the fire. She died in agony, cursing him as the flames consumed her. She screamed that Peter and all his descendants would suffer by fire, burned just as she was. And Peter was Daniel's great-great-grandfather. Everything had unfolded just as the witch said. Daniel's great-grandfather died in a house fire. His grandfather too, then his parents, now him. That was why the villagers feared him. They believed he carried the fire with him, a walking curse. Grief and despair fell upon Daniel with renewed force. That night, he slept in the same shed, but sleep didn't come easily. His thoughts raced about fate, the curse, the injustice of it all. He drank again. He couldn't help himself. Eventually, the alcohol dragged him into unconsciousness. And once again, she came, the burned woman. But this time, he knew who she was. Catherine. He stared into her eyes, hoping her name might somehow change things. But it didn't. Whether she had truly been a witch or not didn't matter. Her hatred for him, for his bloodline, was alive. And she wanted him gone, just like she'd destroyed his ancestors. Daniel woke to shouting. It was Uncle Mitch yelling in a panic. The shed had nearly caught fire again. Mitch told him to leave. Told him to stay far away from his house. Daniel had almost burned the place down. Where would he go now? He had no idea. The next day, Uncle Mitch found Daniel's body in a field. His heart had finally given out. Whether it was the alcohol, the pain, or the ancient curse burning from within, no one could say. But the curse had come full circle. And with Daniel Dash, the last of his bloodline, it ended.